The government has announced a Royal Commission into the Robodebt debt collection service. Let's go live to the Gold Coast. I'm joined by the Shadow Assistant Treasurer Stuart Robert. Stuart Robert, thanks for your time. You had also served, of course, in government as the Minister for Government Services at the time of the Robodebt settlement. Will you appear before the Royal Commission if requested?
Good to speak to you, Kieran. I was the Minister, of course, that received legal advice, that acted on it and stopped the income compliance program. Now, the government, of course, has announced a Royal Commission. Anyone who is called before that will have to provide evidence and turn up, which is fine. I'm looking forward to the terms of reference, and I'm looking forward to them going back to when income compliance started, when income averaging started, and that was in 1990. So if the government's terms of reference go back to the start of income averaging, superb. If it doesn't, well, it's just another witch hunt, Kieran. So it's up to the government now to show that they are fair dinkum about transparency, about getting to the bottom of how income averaging started.
So income matching is one thing. What the government says, though, is that your government took the humans out of the process in terms of overseeing it, and that it was automated, and that the onus of proof was reversed and placed upon the victims.
Income averaging, as you know, is all about taking what you've earned over 12 months and averaging it over a period of a fortnight. It's using the tax system, which is great for tax, but of course application or your entitlement for welfare is based on a fortnight. So that income averaging has been going on for 20, 30 years. Indeed, I got my department to have a look on a sample of 2010, 2011, when Tanya Plibersek and the member for McMahon were both ministers. 20% on average of those cases were income averaged. So this has been going on for a long time. So if the government is fair dinkum about this, they'll go back and have a look at all of it, how it started, how computing was used.
Fine, but it was your government that took the humans out of the system, wasn't it?
Well, when I was running Department of Human Services and subsequently built Services Australia, there were no people taken out of the system. There was the use of income averaging, which had been used for 30 years, and that produced a result to say that you may or may not have a debt. And then, of course, people connected with people. But the issue is income averaging and the use of income averaging, which we know is not sufficient, but has been used for 30 years. So the Royal Commission must look at the entirety of the 30 years to truly understand how income averaging was used.
So I don't mean to, I'm sorry to repeat myself, but the fact is the problems emerged, did they not, in 2016 when the human element was taken out of the review process of the income averaging?
I think the issue gained salience, Kieran, when it was used in large volumes prior to 2016, and I wasn't the minister responsible, the social services minister. Prior to then, it was done on thousands and thousands of cases, not tens upon tens of thousands. So the difference was one of volume, but exactly the same process of income averaging was used, exactly the same process. A new process wasn't developed in 2016. It just used the existing process that had been used for decades.
When you look back, do you regret the fact that the government didn't act sooner after 4 years of complaints, thousands of complaints about Robodebt, tragically some suicides from the families affected? As you look back, do you regret the fact the government didn't act sooner to shut down the automated Robodebt?
On the 2019 election victory, I became the Minister for Government Services, which included Department of Human Services, which became Services Australia. So I was the minister that asked for the legal advice, got the legal advice, sat down with the Attorney General, got their opinion as well as the Solicitor General, and then ended the program. So I'm the minister that ended this and the one that then settled the class action to ensure Australians receive justice. Because if the legal advice that I asked for and received said that the basis for income averaging was not sufficient, then we had a right to repay those Australians, plus, of course, interest, was the process I took into ERC and Cabinet and the process I started.
So you feel vindicated, clearly. Do you feel regret, though, that the government didn't act sooner?
I think the government was consistent in using income averaging that had been used, unfortunately, for 20, 30 years. It would have been great if with successive governments, not just ours, but the governments in the last 20, 30 years had come to know of the lack of sufficiency. I think that would have helped greatly. And that's why the Royal Commission needs to go back those 20, 30 years and understand how income averaging began, because income averaging is the issue at stake.
We've got to get to a few other issues, but just to round this out, you had some of your colleagues talking this up in a big way at the time. Alan Tudge saying, we'll find you, we'll track you down and you will have to repay those debts and you may end up in prison. The government was talking up the Robodebt approach early on, wasn't it?
Can't comment on what the government was doing, Kieran. I'm accountable for what I've done and the steps I've taken to ensure that it was a proper legal basis, that sufficiency was returned, and then, of course, the process was stopped. But it is important to understand that income averaging had been used for decades and decades. It was a known, consistent process. We just now know that it is not sufficient.
Do you accept that the Royal Commission is justified?
Labor went to the election promising a Royal Commission into the issue. As long as the Royal Commission looks into all of these issues of income averaging, how it started, starting with the 1990 Computer Act of Parliament. I think Richo might have put that in. A lot of this documentation I've spoken of in the House, I've tabled in the House, but it's important we understand the history, how we got to this point, and at the point at which legal advice was sought and it stopped. If the Royal Commission looks at that in its completeness, then I think we'll get a good outcome for the Australian people. If it's only looking back the last few years, well, then it is what it purports to be. It's just the Labor Party looking backwards and settling scores. Let's be bigger than that. Let's take the Royal Commission right back 30 years. If we do that, I think Australia will be well served.
What about the Morrison inquiry after the legal advice? Is that justified?
Well, again, we heard the Deputy Prime Minister saying that Mr Morrison must pay a significant price. His own language talks of it about getting square with Morrison. The Attorney-General talking about how witness should be compelled even before we've seen the basis by which any inquiry. All of their actions point this towards being a witch hunt. If it's about open, transparent government, everyone's on board. But it has to be seen, talked about, and the terms of reference have to be framed in that way.
So with the language of the Deputy Prime Minister, why is that not appropriate, given his view, and that view of the Solicitor General, in fact, was that Mr Morrison's behaviour undermined responsible government?
Then have an inquiry to talk about responsible government. But the Deputy Prime Minister came out to say Mr Morrison must face severe consequences, must pay a political price. That's the language of a witch hunt. And you've got other Labor ministers coming out saying, well, the good thing about a witch hunt is you might find witches. So there's multiple ministers now saying this is about retribution. Well, that's not the point of an inquiry. That's not how we strengthen democracy. Labor's own words, hang them on their own petard, Kieran, and we'll call that out. So this is not about consistency or conventions or good government. The Deputy Prime Minister has made it perfectly clear. This is about making sure Morrison pays a severe point. Minister Ayres is saying this is about hunting witches. These are their words, Kieran, not mine.
On to a few other issues, the oil and gas, the 2022 offshore petroleum exploration, it's been announced by the Resources Minister, criticised by the Greens and Teal Independents. Do you welcome the fact that the government's undertaking this regular exploration and being true to its word in shoring up some of those traditional energy supplies?
Government should. Gas is always going to be a key transition fuel for us as we move into areas of hydrogen or other dispatchable energy types. So we need to continue the exploration for gas, both offshore and onshore. My state of Queensland is a great example of responsible, sensible onshore gas exploration. Unfortunately, other states have locked it up. But we need to continue to find and exploit those resources for our own use, for our own cheap dispatchable energy as a transition fuel and as a good citizen of the world. So I think the government's doing the right thing here. The
Coalition had said that the Labor government would be beholden to the Greens and the crossbench. This decision suggests they're far from that.
It's a decision, and this decision on the surface would appear to be a good one. Long time to run yet for the government, Kieran.
On to the Jobs Summit, the ACTU calling for industry-wide bargaining. Given enterprise bargaining is not working, is this the right course?
Now, that's just a return to the old 50s, 60s and 70s of pattern bargaining. That's all it is, where if one workplace gets a wage increase, every workplace right across the country gets a wage increase. It's a recipe for disaster. If enterprise bargaining is struggling, find out what the issues are with enterprise bargaining and address that. But returning to the bad old days where the unions get to march into every workplace is not where we need to be. Unionism is on the decline for a range of good reasons. One of them is better management, better practices, better systems, normalisation of how awards and structures are done. Let's not return to the bad old days, Kieran.
But you can see why they've got a gripe when productivity has increased but wages haven't to the same extent.
Well, actually, productivity hasn't increased, Kieran. That's the problem. Wage increases should always be tacked onto, be part of and come out of productivity increases. But productivity growth has been sluggish. That is one of the problems. Now, we've reached full employment, which is superb, speaking as the Employment Minister from 3 months ago, but productivity is the great issue we have to address. And on the back of productivity, that's when we'll start to see wage increases moving. Without productivity, it feeds into inflation. And right now, inflationary pressures are building. So the government needs to tread very carefully when it comes to their rhetoric and language on wages and wage increases. But productivity is indeed the area to focus on.
David Littleproud is attending the summit next week. In hindsight, should your leader have engaged so your voice is heard?
I'll let Peter Dutton speak for himself. As the leader of the Nationals has decided to attend, all power to the leader of the Nationals in terms of the decision that he's made. All of these, if they're set up properly with strong terms of reference, open and transparent and inclusive, they can have a good outcome. Unfortunately, with this particular summit, you're seeing heavy skews in certain parts of industry where other areas are left out. Not having banking, for example, that employs over 200,000 people would appear to be a mistake in not including them.
And just finally, I know you've had a fair bit to say about the changes in disclosure rules for superannuation funds. Yesterday, I had the Deputy CEO of Industry Super saying that already any fund arrangements with unions, whether it be a pay arrangement for directors of super funds, that all of that is disclosed and nothing will change under the government's rules on this. Does that placate you?
No, not at all, because he's wrong. Bless him. I've also met with him and his team, and they gave me the same half-assed line. The bottom line is sponsoring payments, supporting union picnics, sponsoring magazines and the like aren't appropriately declared. They aren't out there to see. The next industry super will say, oh, these are confidential contracts and we can't do it. The bottom line is people have to give up their superannuation monies. It's compulsory. It goes to these large funds. What these funds spend on, $85 million over 5 years, the AFR reports, is not disclosed. Members can't see it, and members are entitled to see where their money has gone. This Labor government said nothing about these changes during the election, yet the first thing Treasury does is to put this into place. They campaigned on transparency, and the first thing Treasury is doing is withdrawing transparency. They have no mandate for it, they didn't take it for the election, and there is absolutely and utterly no requirement to change it, except that all the industry fund member meetings are starting in the next few weeks. Who would have thought the timing, Kieran?
Liberal frontbencher Stuart Robert, we're out of time. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Great to talk to you.